31-year-old man who admitted to killing victims in his apartment, then dismembering their bodies, may have murdered up to 17 people.
A serial killer is on the loose in the Daytona area.
Investigators are on the trail of a possible serial killer.
A stunning claim from an accused killer awaiting trial in Pennsylvania.
And authorities believe they could very well have a serial killer in custody.
And they say it may be the work of a serial killer.
An accused serial killer in
Welcome to another episode of 5 Minutes of Murder. I'm your host, Danny Longlegs, and this is a segment where I take us into the fantastic voyage of the mind of a serial killer. On tonight's lab, we have Israel Keyes, one of the most frightening serial killers that you probably never heard of. He was a bank robber, a rapist, a kidnapper, and a murderer who was guilty for at least one murder. Four murders. He's suspected of 11 murders. Man, probably a whole lot more than that, spanning over an entire time of 14 years. Israel Keyes was born January 7th, 1978 in Richmond, Utah. His parents were Mormon and they chose to homeschool Israel, and of course his 9 other brothers. Now past all of that, nothing seemed to be really out of the ordinary with his adolescence. Then in 1998, we fast forward, and Keyes joins the U.S. Army, and he serves until 2001. While there, Keyes was stationed in Egypt on a mortar team. He was in the 1st Battalion, where he was decorated and received numerous awards like the Army Achievement Medal, the Army Service Ribbon, the Marksman Badge with Rifle Bar, the Expert Infantryman Badge, and the Air Assault Badge. Keyes was known for his quiet demeanor. He basically kept to himself all the time, and he's just a quiet dude. That was until weekends, where he basically still hung out by himself, but at this time he'd drink heavily, consuming entire bottles of his favorite drink, Wild Turkey Bourbon. Other than that, the only other thing that people knew about him was he was heavily into the music of the Insane Clown Posse. Although you and I both know, just because he likes his music doesn't make him a juggalo, because Lord knows a serial killer ain't really a juggalo. You know what I'm saying? Any case, he still had several large posters of him hanging in his barracks. Keyes left the Army July 8th, 2001, and he started traveling all over the place working as a handyman and a contractor. He'd take odd jobs, and he's basically exploring the countryside until 2007, where he basically settled down and established Keyes Construction in Anchorage, Alaska, which was to be his base of operation and plan out basically was his sinister actions. See, what is so special about Israel Keyes is that his method of his countermeasures were extreme. He would use tons of different systems to keep any chance of being caught, but not only that, to connect himself to his victims. First, he planned murders way in advance, 2 to 3 years, not so much who, but where. He took extraordinary actions to avoid detection. Unlike most serial killers, he didn't have a victim profile. It was just totally at random. He would kill far away from his home, sometimes as much as 3,000 miles, and he'd never kill in the same area twice. He would put together these things called kill kits that were basically made up of a bucket that had inside tape, guns, ropes, knives, handcuffs, and all that great stuff. He put it all together, he'd bury these things in key areas that he'd again revisit later on. These kits would stay sitting for years until he'd take a random murder trip to those areas and dig them up. Now during these trips, he would target his victims completely at random, no connection to him whatsoever. He'd drive all over the place, thousands of miles in one direction, thousands of miles in the other, only using cash, only using rental vehicles, and basically even turning off his cell phone. I mean, he would have extra cell phones and leave his other one at home. All of this kept Keyes off the radar for some time, but then February 1st, 2012, everything was about to change.
In Alaska, we have these drive-up coffee stands that are oftentimes in parking lots of businesses. Samantha Koenig is a young woman, 18 years old, and she worked in one of those coffee stands. At closing time, she's the only barista that's there. Unfortunately,
the 18-year-old Samantha wasn't there. She was missing. Her boyfriend and her father were so worried they contacted police the next day.
One of our officers contacted the owner of Common Grounds Coffee Shop, and she was able to show them video. A man came to the little kiosk window at 8 o'clock. Samantha made a coffee drink for him, turned back around, and then you can tell she's shocked.
Samantha turns out the lights, and you can see the individual jumping in through the window. Samantha and the individual leave the coffee stand and then disappear from line of sight from the camera.
Flyers were passed out all over the area. Search teams started to begin going all over the state, and people began all over to look for her.
Use this area as a meeting place because this is where my daughter was taken from.
There were no leads, there was nothing. But luckily, a local area storefront did provide a possible cue with their security camera. So they had footage showing Samantha getting to what they appeared to be a white pickup truck. Although the searches would continue, Samantha Koenig would never be seen again. Well, at least alive.
These people need to give my daughter back so we can get back with our lives. I will do anything. Take me.
2.5 weeks later, something really freaky happened. See, Samantha's boyfriend was eating dinner when he received a text sent to his phone from Samantha's phone.
Basically, it says, Connors Park, underneath Albert Pick, ain't she purty?
Law enforcement rushed to Connors Lake Park to find basically this bulletin board section set up at the entrance.
When you enter that park, there's a bulletin board. And tacked was a Ziploc bag that had what ultimately was a photograph of Samantha and a ransom note.
In the ransom note, along with a photo, the kidnapper also demanded that $30,000 be placed in Samantha's bank account. Law enforcement decided to bait this trap, to deposit these funds and then to wait. They contacted the bank, and with law enforcement, they put her accounts under 24-hour surveillance. Any activity, they would get a notification. A few days basically went by, and they would get their first hit, that of a photo, from an ATM machine. Samantha's ATM card had been used to withdraw $500, the daily limit. This was done 3 more times, 3 more days in the area of Anchorage, Alaska.
Dispatched law enforcement there as quickly as we could, but we were literally minutes behind him.
Now, after those 3 hits, the account went silent. Nobody knew what was going on. That until several weeks later when the detectives would receive another alert from another withdrawal of another ATM machine on March 7th, this time in Wilcox, Arizona, more than 3,000 miles away from Anchorage, Alaska. Now, the second withdrawal came shortly after the next day. This one, though, was in Lawrenceburg, New Mexico, and a third on March 10th in Humboldt, Texas, and a fourth in Shepherd, Texas. All for the $500 every single day. In the ATM camera footage on each machine, it appeared to be the same person, the same build, wearing a mask, driving a white Ford Focus, and apparently heading eastbound. A nationwide APB went out, and soon enough, the car, matching a description, came to the attention of a Texas Highway Patrol officer. Looking suspicious enough, the officer decided to follow the car until the driver made a vehicle infraction, giving them the cause to pull it over. Only to discover not only did the driver have an Alaska driver's license, but upon further searching the vehicle, they found clothing that matched the descriptions of the APB from the footage of the ATM machines, and they sort of put 2 together. The suspect was then identified as 34-year-old Israel Keys and was immediately put under arrest. The officer then continued to search Keys' car, only to find a gun, along with Samantha Koenig's cell phone and her debt card. Now, with everything found in his possession, along with the things that were now found at his home, evidence was stacking up. It was becoming basically crippling. They didn't know what to do at this point.
We go back to his house. We identify his truck from the video surveillance. So the U.S. Attorney's Office sets up a meeting with Keys' defense attorney, and ultimately it's an opportunity for us to show him what evidence we have.
During the first interview, Keys said nothing. He sat quiet, he listened, and at the end, his defense got up and said, "We'll be in contact." Now, a few hours would go by, and Keys' defense attorney would call the FBI to say that they were going to come in, they're going to give a full confession, but Keys had some serious demands he wanted to make sure they were met before he did anything.
Mood significantly changed once we first got to hear from Israel Keys. It was clear just how cold and calculating he was.
I can give you the rest of the story, like, you know, everything that happened, if I get a cigar.
He wanted an Americano, and he wanted a peanut butter Snickers bar, and he wanted an opportunity to smoke a cigar, which at the time we thought were pretty silly. But if that's what it was going to take for him to talk with us, we were willing to do that.
What were Keys' demands? They were simple. He would tell it all for 3 simple things: Americana, coffee, a peanut butter Snickers, and the ability to smoke a cigar. After this, at that point, Keys began to go into great detail to everything pertaining to the kidnapping, rape, and murder of Samantha Koenig. It was so graphic, however, that still to this day, the FBI will not release the full audio tapes.
He had a shed in his driveway, and ultimately he put Samantha in the shed.
It was there in that little shed Samantha was beaten, repeatedly raped, strangled, and then finally stabbed after she was already dead from being strangled. To keep his neighbors and his living girlfriend and his 10-year-old daughter none the wiser, when he was in the shed, he would turn up his stereo to muffle any sounds out of the ordinary.
I think in his words, he said, "You got your monster."
No one had any clue this was going on. Not his friends, not his family, not his daughter. Not until he was caught in Texas. Israel Keys was on nobody's radar whatsoever. Then, later that day, he agreed to disclose the location of Samantha Koenig's body in exchange for a second round of his favorite goodies. Cigar coffee and what was the other one? Oh, Snickers bar. It was there in that shed that he left her body to freeze for 2 weeks, till he was back from a family vacation from New Orleans. After thawing her out, he dressed her up. He put makeup on her, and he braided her hair like he used to braid his daughter's hair. Then he took the photo that was basically included in the ransom note. He then took her body, packed it up, and brought it out to this lake called Lake Madawaska that was known for ice fishing. It's a very huge lake, and everybody would set up on these places and ice fish. He then used this ruse to dismember her body and then drop the parts into the lake as he fished. The fishing was a cover story to why he was there.
So I asked him kind of, I guess, apropos of nothing. I just, well, did you catch any fish? And he said, yeah, I caught fish. I go, what'd you do with them? He goes, I took them home and ate them. So that really kind of turned my stomach as well, that this guy would, he's disposing of a body, catching fish, and going home and serving them to his family.
The FBI immediately sent out a team of forensic divers out to the lake, where Keys specifically marked on the map where her body would be. And wouldn't you know it, just like he said, they were able to recover her body. Well, what was left of it, pretty much. Once all of her remains were recovered and she was identified, it was confirmed, it was relayed back to Keys. His reaction, however, was very odd and brought a cause for alarm to the investigators. It seemed he was absolutely unaffected by any of it all. It was becoming abundantly clear to everyone that this murder was probably not his first. It was then law enforcement began to make inquiries more to Keys, where Keys basically cut to the chase. He said that, in fact, he had been living 2 lives and that he had been doing things of this nature for at least 14 years. He also stated that he would work with them completely. He would tell it all to them in exchange for a certain amount of demands on top of what he has already asked for. Now, first of all, he demanded that he'd get the death penalty. But not only get the death penalty, he wanted a guaranteed date of execution. He wanted this to end. Secondly, he asked for anonymity, that his daughter would never know of his actions, it would never become identified that he had a daughter, and that she would have a chance to grow up perfectly normal with a perfectly normal life. Now, law enforcement would use these things as leverage to get Keys to spill his guts, confessing to so many other things, so many other crimes, cold cases, murders, and rapes throughout the countryside. Their fears were confirmed almost immediately as the numbers of incidences grew and the locations began to cover the entire countryside. But only to what Keys was willing to reveal. It was clear he was holding back a lot. But regardless, it is now apparent to everyone that Israel Keys was in fact a true monster. Now, as time passed, it came to light, Keys became more withdrawn and became more angry towards the law enforcement, partly because the agreement had not been put in motion for his death. It had not been moved forward. Finally, he just got fed up and he had enough.
Early in the morning that he had committed suicide in his jail cell.
They found that he used a disposable razor embedded in a pencil to slit his wrist. How he got the razor, the Department of Corrections won't say.
Similar to the feeling of losing a case, like he won, right? He got exactly what he wanted. He didn't get to tell us anything. He got his own little death penalty, and he beat us. And that's the way I felt.
At the time of his suicide, 4 blank pages were found in his cell that ended up being his suicide note of sorts, complete with a serial killer poetry of his last words. And I quote, "Okay, talk is over. Words are placid and weak. Back it with action or it all comes off cheap. Watch close while I work now. Feel the electric shock of my touch. Open your trembling flower or your petals, I'll crush." And so there you have it, folks. Israel Keys, one of 6 sociopaths who we are all happy is no longer, well, walking among us. That's it for this episode of 5 Minutes of Murder. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoy bringing it to you. And as always, don't forget to lock your doors and windows, because you never know when it's going to be your 5 minutes that are up next. Peace.